Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. Ang pag-uusapan natin, kayo ba'y naging biktima o peddler ng disinformation? Ala, masalimuot pong usapin pero maraming pwedeng interventions o pagsasaayos ng ating mga conversations. Kasama po natin ang Associate Professor ng Global Digital Media sa University of Massachusetts sa Amherst. Siya rin po ay Andrew Carnegie Fellow 2022 at Soren Science Center Fellow 2020 to 2023 sa Harvard University. Kilalang-kilala po siya dahil sa mga akda niyang libro na talagang tinutukan itong medyo makabagong usapin na to. Si Mr. Jonathan Corpus Ong. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Malu. Such an honor to be here.
All right. Umpisahan natin. Ano ba to talagang nangyayari? You call it parallel public spheres. You call it parang tipong, sabi ni Professor July Tihangki, multiverse of madness. Ano ang ibig sabihin nun? In plain terms, what's happening sa ating kwentuhan?
Yeah, so ang parallel public spheres, ito po yung diagnosis namin, itong latest study namin base noong 2022 elections na because of disinformation campaigns being so normalized and attacks on mainstream media, attacks on historians, scientific experts, nawala na yung trust natin sa traditional gatekeepers of knowledge. So ngayon, people choose to believe the reality that, affirms their political beliefs, the political camp of their choice. So kaya nagka-watak-watak na may kanya-kanya na silang political reality. Ito yung tinatawag naming parallel public spheres. And then we also translated to Tagalog and mas makata yung pag-translate nitong parallel public spheres, mga mundong hindi magtagpo. So kanya-kanya ng realidad and belief systems ang mga Pilipino ngayon. And that's, for us, the consequence of, more than 6 years of disinformation campaigns being so prevalent and so normalized in Philippine society.
Okay. Then matanong ko lang kasi hindi naman ngayon lang yan, di ba? Bitak-bitak tayo sa ating paniniwala, sa ating politika, pero dun sa inyong pag-aaral, tinututukan ninyo yung gaano ka divided o toxic yung mga political camps, pro BBM, pro Lenny, and in between parang asa na yung mga tao, yung broad gray middle. Ang tanong ko lang, yung bang parallel public spheres na dyan, meron bang income divide, may gender divide, may age divide? So ano yung elements that determine where we belong?
That's a good question, Malu. Because I think there's often itong assumptions natin, di ba, na yung mga biktima ng disinformation or biktima ng, those who tend to support populist leaders na anti-establishment, anti-elites, or anti-mainstream media. Ang assumption natin kadalasan is ito yung mga hindi masyado nakapag-aral, kulang sa exposure sa libro, history. We also tend to blame younger people nowadays na ito kasi yung generation na hindi lumaki during martial law time. So perhaps they're much more vulnerable to historical revisionism. So sa pag-aaral namin, people have different orientations and hindi siya purely social class or age determined, whether you believe in disinformation or you profit from disinformation. Kung middle class ka or elite ka, you can also be, responsible for or complicit to disinformation sa pagpapalaganap nito. So, kailangan nating i-interrogate itong mga, stereotypes natin, itong mga bobotante or itong mga troll. Ang assumption natin, ito yung mga taga certain regions, for example, Ilocos or Davao. Sa pag-aaral namin, disinformation production can happen anywhere. It can happen in Makati boardrooms. It can happen in BGC. Sabi niyo po, ma'am, di ba, matagal na ito So itong mga practice na contemporary ng disinformation, may historical background din ito, may historical precursor din ito sa mga black propaganda, black campaigning. So yun yung mga pinag-aaralan namin.
I-unpack lang nga natin. Pag sinabing disinformation, ano siya? Gaano siya kaiba sa misinformation o sa fake news?
Opo. So, misinformation, ito po yung mga rumors, ito yung mga may nakita tayong, for example, celebrity na akala natin namatay na, a very common form of misinformation on social media, namatay kung sinong kilalang tao. And hindi naman siya mukhang plinante ng isang operative, di ba? Or ng strategist. So, parang rumor lang siya. Disinformation is may intention behind it. Ito ay usually may bayad involved, 'di ba? Parang may strategist na tinutulungan yung kliyente niya, may inutusan gumawa ng fake news, gumawa ng meme, or magplant ng fake story sa social media. So yun yung disinformation. Fake news, ito in a way, a 2016 term, ngayon hindi na natin masyado ginagamit, but we often use it to talk about imposter website, yung mga parang time.com pero nakasulat t1me.com. So parang fake news website siya talaga. Imposter ng Time or CNN or baka dati may imposter din ng GMA News, ganyan.
Correct. Pero ang sabi nyo, mas tinignan ninyo noong 2022 itong parallel public spheres dahil sa political campaigns, ano? Parang gaano ka bago itong pangangampanya ng mga politiko? Bakit parang mas malawak, mas malalim, mas matindi yung parallel public spheres ng disinformation na sinasabi ninyo? Hindi ba dating gawin naman ito ng mga politiko?
Yeah, so that's a good question na may mga bagong imbento ang disinformation. So mga journalists, mga academics, mga fact checkers, tinatry nating hulihin sila. So nag-evolve din sila, 'di ba? So parang cat and mouse games ito na parang we try to catch them, we try to deplatform them, and then nag-innovate sila. Yung unang tanong niyo pa yung parallel public spheres, ano yung cumulative effect niya, 'di ba? So, ngayon, depende sa political camp mo, you can have your own information ecosystem.
Mhm.
So dati 'di ba parang we turn to GMA, we turn to other broadcast channels. We watch the same noontime show, we watch the same programs, the same news. We have a shared sense of facts and reality kumbaga. Ngayon, may kanya-kanya ng choice of not just news, 'di ba may sarili ng broadcast news yung kabilang panig, pero meron na din silang celebrity, meron din silang influencer, meron silang lifestyle blogger, meron silang political commentator sa YouTube. So, buong-buo na itong ecosystem. So, we're talking about it as a whole, storytelling complex.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, kasama na din dito ang entertainment. Kasama dito ang cinema,
Mhm.
lifestyle programming. So, disinformation is much more subtle and complicated now. So, dati, di ba, for example, in the context of historical revisionism. So,
Mhm.
dati nung 2016, pinag-aralan namin ito sa study called Architects of Network Disinformation. This is available on open access. You can download this for free. So dito, yung mga example namin dun sa report na yun, mga memes.
Mhm.
So parang before and after martial law, ganyan. Tapos mukhang dinoktor yung photograph, 'di ba? So ngayon in 2022, it's now an entertainment production. 'Di ba?
Okay.
There's a whole movie
Mhm.
about the past. It's also a performance of
Mhm.
victimhood that people, express in their own YouTube channels. So
Okay.
mas elaborate and strategic na ito. Hindi lang ito image or memes.
Alright. You're talking about also the impact of technology kasi 'di ba sabi nila nung nagkaroon ng internet, here comes everybody. Sobrang daming content creators. Everybody is a content creator. At the same time, you talked about the diminished public trust in legacy or traditional media. Paano nagfi-figure 'yon? Kasi parang tipong yung isa mahina. Sabi nila, di ba, parang depende kasi, parang the more diminish the role of traditional media, yung sources of reality natin, sabi ninyo, klaro. And vis-a-vis technology where everybody could play and post anything they want. Ano yung balance doon? Where are we now? Are we losing the game sa traditional media? Are we gaining ground sa new media?
Great question, Malu. And it's actually one of the more controversial statements na sinulat namin dun sa report, which we aim, really as more of a description of what happened nung 2022 elections and also comparing it to nung 2016. So nung 2016, if you remember, Malu, maraming nagsasabi it was the first social media election. Duterte won because of social media. We were saying, really, maybe not as much compared to 2022. If you recall nung 2016, si Duterte tumaas yung ratings niya because of his performances during live TV debates
Correct.
hosted by mainstream media na 'di ba binabara niya yung mga kalaban niya. He was very, full of bluster, 'di ba? In these kinds of live TV debates, and he seemed very unpredictable, and he generated a lot of media headlines, pero sumali siya.
Mhm.
Sumali siya sa debate. Sa 2022, hindi na sumali ang ating naging pangulo ngayon, 'di ba? So he completely refused attendance sa mainstream media. Our traditional expectation is mainstream media is the political center.
Mhm.
So people of different camps will meet in the center, hosted by mainstream media. Ngayon, may sarili na silang ibang ecosystem, as I said earlier. So I think that was for us a very rude awakening na parang something really happened here na for a candidate and the victor to completely refuse attendance in mainstream media in the political center says something about the status of journalists and mainstream media. And we're saying it in a descriptive way. It's
Okay.
not a critique of journalists, right? But we're saying na nawalan ng trust because of their attacks of over the past 6 years.
Alright. Ngayon, bigyan mo nga lang tayo ng sequence, yung timeline nito. Kasi natandaan ko, noong 2010 elections, parang the candidates were just invading mga Facebook pages or doing ads here and there sa mga online media platforms. Tapos mga black hats operations, yung mga tipong organized na talagang load up, or even, I think one candidate in 2010 even invaded YouPorn kasi malaki yung audience noon. Noong 2016, yung sinasabi mo na parang network disinformation, yung troll farms na dumating. At ngayon, may sarili na silang mga platforms or tawag nyo ecosystem. So, through it all, was it a problem of they being smarter than the mainstream media and traditional sources of information? Or parang ang dapat bang i-blame dito yung audience o yung the communicators we have, the content creators we have? Are they failing? Is one part smarter than the other?
Wow, that's such a good question. I think you brought a lot of elements together, Malu, with that question. So, yeah, who's to blame? I'm a sociologist first and foremost, and obviously, as an academic, we're often wanting to discuss the broader social structure and social system. Na hindi lang ito about the citizens or hindi lang ito about one individual. Certainly, there's a convergence point in global culture, itong anti-globalism movement, di ba? Expressed not just by Duterte's victory in the Philippines, but Donald Trump, Brexit, Bolsonaro. So may global element din ito na it represents, a shifting global orientation about, this a much stronger sense of nationalism and national pride that certain leaders were able to exploit, and then natututo sila sa isa't isa. So kung anong gagawin ni Modi sa India, gagawin din ni Bolsonaro, gagawin din ni Trump, 'di ba? So may ganong they learn from each other, itong mga smart illiberal leaders. At the same time, for us journalists and academics, I don't know. I'm also speculating here, and help me think it through, Malu. Parang for us, we tend to double down and be defensive about our work.
Correct.
Parang academic ako, so I go back to studying, I go back to my traditional methodology, I go back to doing kung 'di ba binabayaran ako magturo, so I do the routines. So
Mhm.
parang hindi tayo quick nag-evolve na parang, yung mga bata ngayon medyo iba na yung style nila matuto.
Mhm.
Kailangan nandun ka na sa Instagram, kailangan gumagamit ka ng more contemporary example.
Correct.
Kailangan hindi ka masyadong historical but you always try to be very current in terms of examples. So maybe we were slower to evolve, to
Mhm.
respond to the changing times. That's a hypothesis. What
Mhm.
do you think?
Ako parang kasi sa communication, parang minsan you can't blame the audience, di ba? Although sabi ni Wilbur Schramm, the medium is the message. But of course, the message is critical here, di ba? Pinaniniwalaan ka ba? Ang sabi ng ibang, the way you do it sa media would be, dapat kumonek, mag-stick, magkaroon ng parang makaantig sa isip, puso at kiliti ng mga tao. Now, if you look at the conversation so far, it's too elite and elderly. Di ba? Pag
Mm,
mainstream media, walang sense of humor. Now we go
y-
to the CSO community, parang tipong talking down on the community.
yes.
My point is, asan yung audience? Have we neglected understanding our audience? Sino ba yung kausap? Bukod sa madalas Ingles, ano? Of course, yung primetime news Tagalog. Pero parang tipong palaging merong generalization o political analysis or ideologically loaded na mga analysis. So, have we lost touch with the audience?
That's a good, yeah, I love that, yeah, hypothesis, Malu. So I also have done, research alongside human rights workers in the
Mhm.
Philippines. So, because you mentioned messaging and campaigns, 'di ba? So, pinag-aralan namin yung human rights community kung paano din nag-evolve yung messaging nila. And napuna namin marami sa kanila, they continue doing itong attack kind of messaging na parang ibagsak, 'di ba, yung kung sino yung nasa authority, 'di ba? So parang very combative. Some are, trying newer, more positive messaging, more inclusive, more targeted na, oh, we're going to target only LGBTQ and their rights or women's rights and make it more inspiring
Mhm.
as opposed to itong combative na messaging na nakaka-turn off or it sounds the same as the campaigns of 10, 15 years ago. So I can see parallels with what you said.
Mhm. Ngayon, pag-usapan natin yung pagka sinabi kasing disinformation, merong individuals at may organizations. At syempre may pera. Sa inyo bang pagsusuri, parang tipong ano yung dapat mainframe o dapat tutukan? Kasi yung individuals, you could be swayed, di ba? By a friend who posted this bit of info or this post and then you retweet it or repost it. Pero pag organizations, I think dun sa troll farms ninyong report, ano, yung network disinformation, networks na troll farms, ang tinitingnan ninyo is yung organizations behind it and the money behind it. Ano yung findings ninyong kakaiba? Kasi parang mga politiko, mga PRs, mga sabi ninyo, of course, yung mga influencers, nakalahok sa kanila. How does it work really? What is the money behind it all?
Yeah, great question. So, I think, some people and most people, most journalists, try to study disinformation once it spreads and tries to correct disinformation that way. Myself and my colleagues, we study and we try to study disinformation, how it is made,
Okay.
where it is made, who produces it, who earns and profits from it, how the relationship between the worker and the client, um, what relationship that is, where it's actually regulated, how it happens, where it happens. So, dun sa study namin nung 2018, Architects of Network Disinformation, ang ginawa namin is, hindi, obviously there's a part of, understanding ano ba talaga yung mga narratives ng disinformation. Pero yung focus namin is yung mga tao, the human stories, the workers, the
Mhm.
paid troll operators. And then we tried to also interview them. Um, I don't know, Mamalu, whether you know na my background, I after college in Ateneo, ang first job ko is in advertising agency in the Philippines. And then I was also in marketing sa GMA po. So, marami akong kilala na advertising yung background. So, doon ako nagsimula na parang introduce nyo naman ako doon sa mga gumagawa ng advertising for politicians para malaman ko kung paano sila nag-advertise and nag-marketing in current contexts. So, dun ko nabuo yung picture of the disinformation architecture na yung kliyente will enlist a PR firm. The PR firm will enlist influencers, itong mga tanyag na celebrities online, pati na yung mga parody accounts and meme accounts. And then, meron silang mga taga-share, itong mga fake account operators, itong mga troll, kumbaga, na nasa Facebook, nasa messaging platforms, sila yung taga-share ng mga messages. So, hierarchy siya, and para sa amin, yung kadalasan na usapin yung mga trolls sa baba, itong mga yung mga mukhang fake accounts, 'di ba, sa Twitter or sa Facebook na mukhang medyo halata naman sila. Pero sabi namin, importanteng alamin sino ba yung nasa tuktok nitong hierarchy, sino ba yung top trolls. Itong mga PR firms and PR strategists na talagang nag-assemble ng campaigns for politicians. And yung name, yung tawag sa kanila, hindi sila troll, 'di ba? Marketing strategist, political consultant, search engine specialist. So, very fancy yung mga professional titles sa kanila.
But have you really thought about parang ang tutok sana is follow the money and actually look at accountability issues, ano, lalo na kung public funds ang ginagamit. Kasi nga, typically, pagka political campaigns, election campaigns, talaga namang nakukulimbat ang pondo ng bayan, ano, in subtle and not so subtle ways. So, kung yung meron bang nagtututok, liban doon sa disinformation, it's really affecting the community, ano, the conversation. But what about the accountability parts of it? Yung saan galing yung pondo at sino ang behind it, as you were saying. Hindi
Yeah.
yung mga PR o consultants lang, kasi in a way, sila din yung parang top line executors lang.
Of course. Yeah, so yung study namin, obviously it's interview based, and we tell the human stories of troll operators. Pero hindi lang ito kwento-kwento ng mga individuals, 'di ba? But there's as you mentioned, there's a regulatory set of questions here. How come this very unethical practice of a political campaigning, how come it is not made transparent and held accountable? Bakit itong industriya na ito, ang laki ng kita ng pera, pero walang consequences for the people involved, right? So that's a huge question. So I think I have been working with local civil society groups like Lente. So this is a group of lawyers. A lot of their advocacy is on campaign finance reform, na dapat itong mga binabayaran nila na digital marketing report ng mga politicians. So may oversight sa kanilang amount of spends for political campaigns.
Correct.
It is a very limited form of accountability, but it is something. Obviously, the campaign the money spent for propaganda outside of elections, hindi natin yun mahihingi. But and this is why the power of stories is so important. If we retell the stories of these workers, people who are in advertising firms, and meron kami mga na-interview, including in our podcast, which is based on our research, na they were recruited for PR firms. Akala nila yung account nila is for a shampoo brand or a soft drink brand. There's some deception involved in the recruitment na first day of the job, mayor pala yung kliyente nila, and they're assigned to create memes for the mayor. So there's a lack of ethics within the industry of advertising and PR, and we need to talk about it. So for us, hearing stories of other people retell their stories, na parang ako na-recruit ako without my consent, na na-assign ako for a political account to create memes. Sana ma-empower people within the industries to come out to have the courage to come out and talk about these things, become whistleblowers, 'di ba? So
I
to
understand a
discuss.
good number of them had not been so happy, and that's why they pulled out or stepped out of the industry, Pero parang still, when it's campaign season, andoon na naman ulit yung mga operations na yan. And sadly, it doesn't seem like the COMELEC actually has the experience, the expertise,
Mm,
or even the means to capture data on
I
online advertising, social media marketing.
I agree. And dito pumapasok yung whole of society approach na, so you mentioned COMELEC. COMELEC is under-resourced as an entity. I think there are some good, well-meaning people in that bureaucracy, but they're underfunded. Na-meet namin yung mga monitors and yung mga nangongolekta ng campaign expenditure ng mga politician. Aba, pinoprocess nila yung previous election pa. Hindi pa sila tapos sa previous election. And of course, 2022 election has just finished too. So, kailangan nila ng tulong. And that's why sana civil society comes in, academics come in, but it needs some element of change and reform from the top. We need new legislation as well. So doon sila underpowered, and kaya we hope academic researchers, other journalist organizations like the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, specialty nila ang campaign finance. So they all have just recently published, a lot of campaign finance documents from the last election, and halatang may mga nag-abuso pero walang penalty. 'Di ba? Yun yung nakaka-sad din na parang halata naman na may masamang nangyari pero walang penalty.
All right. Pero yun yata yung kwentong bayan natin, di ba? Parang the big guys with big money will always run the show. We have to
Yeah.
save. Pero ang tansya ko, paano natin yung interventions mas magiging focused? You talked about regulatory agency sana na mas may ngipin at may new legislation siguro na pwedeng ipasa. Ano pa ang pwedeng gawin on the level of yung individuals or communities or organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, fact checkers have been on the front line fighting disinformation. So what they do, and there's new support and investment and coalitions are emphasizing fact checking. They find something false in the news and they make a correction. Nag-evolve na din ang fact checking. May bago ng trend of pre-bunking na ito yung parang ina-anticipate nila yung future kinds of disinfo na parang through teaching citizens online, they will say, this is how disinformation might sound. So the next time you encounter a story on this topic, alert ka na dapat dahil ganito yung sound niya to mislead you, di ba? So that's what we call pre-bunking. So as compared to debunking, which is after the fact, a pre-bunking is before the fact. But I think we need more than that. We need more than just fact-checking and pre-bunking initiatives. Kailangan din natin ng new spaces for us to have conversations and meet in the middle. I don't know with you, Malu, but when I meet students and when I do lectures with college students in the Philippines, so obviously I talk about my research, the disinformation economy, PR firms, pero yung unang tanong often is thank you sir for your research, but I need to find a way to have a conversation with my mommy na iba yung pananaw, ibang political reality, or my teacher na kung ano-anong tinuturo about EDSA na hindi base sa textbook. So that's a new kind of challenge, how to have these conversations. So ang tawag dito is depolarization. So parang how to find spaces in the middle. Obviously that's an advocacy of VP Robredo too. Parang she's an advocate of itong radical empathy, 'di ba? And finding spaces in the middle. Pero yung trend ngayon is itong whole of society na ang ibig sabihin is hindi na lang ito dapat na frontliners sa journalist ang dapat lumalaban sa fake news, dapat lahat tayo researchers, librarians, comedians. You mentioned how humor is important, diba? So storytellers, I think all of these talents and skills are needed to create new educational materials that will empower citizens.
Pero John, before we can even agree to depolarize, o mag-whole of society approach, we cannot ignore na people have their own firm political beliefs and inclinations. So how do you bring in yung the middle? Na parang tipo, ayoko, ang toxic ninyo, dalawang panig kayo. Nasa gitna ako and I don't want to be nudged into a corner with either side. Where is that community? Is that a big gray middle na hindi pro or anti, whatever political inclinations you have?
That's a good question. So, where is the middle? So I also base this, on research done by American colleagues. So I work in the United States. So some of my colleagues here, like Ethan Zuckerman, ang sabi niya, so people at the local politics is where a lot of meeting in the middle can happen, because so I forget like whom he quotes in his book called Mistrust, but he said something like, when it comes to cleaning the streets, there's no Democrats or Republicans. We just need to clean the streets. So parang if you focus on local problems, you can have hyper local solutions too, where hindi ito base sa DDS versus kakamping or pula or 'di ba? So parang if you focus on very specific issues, perhaps there could be more cooperation and more opportunities to collaborate.
Okay. But could there be new messaging also from new sources? Kasi pag tiningnan mo, well, actually spoken for. Yung mga influencers o yung mga important voices sa kwentuhan. Meron bang parang kulang sa kwentuhan? Parang could we smoke out new sources of opinion or ideas? Yung parang honest middle broker. Like the anthropologists, the sociologists, the librarians, so parang people from the professions, kasi parang tipong pare-pareho yung mga pangalan, parang the usual
It's
suspects.
true. Tayo-tayo lang palagi nag-uusap, 'di ba? So tama po kayo, ma'am. So tayo-tayo lang palagi nag-uusap. When we do yung mga academic conferences, aminado na ako na, yeah, I see the same people all the time. Even within the disinformation space na lumalawak na yung coalition, pero similar organizations yung nagli-lead, similar faces yung nakikita natin. And what we need is to bring in more people. And so, wag tayo mag-gatekeep, wag tayo 'di ba, magmaganda na tayo na una and therefore tayo palagi ang leader, 'di ba? So parang we need to trust other people to find the right solutions for their own problems, and perhaps can connect with their communities better than we do. So for example, for myself, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. I'm not the best when it comes to, speaking to the public. Hindi ako marunong mag-TikTok. Wala po akong TikTok. Pero I can possibly collaborate with a TikToker na baka ma-translate naman niya some of our research. Ang dami na naming papers na nasulat, pero hindi siya accessible. Hindi siya in Tagalog, hindi siya in Bisaya or Ilocano. Kailangan siyang ma-translate to specific communities. Kailangan siyang gawing mas Becky, mas masaya, mas inspiring, and hindi ako yung gagawa doon, but I can collaborate with someone who can do that. Sana may librarian who can also put this all in one website and try to make it available for free to other people. One more example, itong mga media literacy or digital literacy, parang napupuna ko lang, hindi po ito criticism, pero napupuna ko lang, most of itong digital literacy palaging masa yung medyo dinidiin, yung pinupuna, yung palaging yung setting nasa karinderya na si Ale na bola ng fake news, and siya yung medyo fino-focus. Parang ako, I feel uncomfortable na palaging sila yung biniblame, na sila palagi yung biniblame na disinformer or gullible. So feeling ko, rich people, the middle class, they're the ones who are also complicit to, to voting for illiberal leaders who are, voting for policy that are very harmful to society. And sila may belief systems din sila na kailangan natin punahin. 'Di ba? So parang kailangan natin na wag masyadong punching down sa masa, pero itong mga middle class, itong mga rich people who are obviously complicit, I think kailangan din natin silang punahin.
Okay. Pero tama ka, parang minsan kasi it's the people who are the educated and the elite who write the stories, di ba? Minsan ang peg, parang tipong kawawa yung mga mahihirap o palaging naloloko yung mga mahihirap. But the poor is intelligent vote eh. The poor are intelligent voters. Ang point mo dito is yung, okay, so medyo may choices silang ginagawa pag election. Siguro dahil merong influence operators, may mga troll farms, pero some principles are non-negotiable, di ba? As the politicized and the politically aware would say, human rights, good governance, accountability, transparency. But maybe for the mass of citizens and voters, some results are non-negotiable. Di ba? Parang tipong ano yung resulta sa presyo ng mga bilihin, kapayapaan sa mga komunidad natin. So yung human rights, siguro hindi masyadong civil political rights, but criminal justice system rights. Di ba? Parang, so saan yung pagtatagpo? The principles probably are good, but the results are what people may be looking at, and at core, it's the messaging of the politicians that would matter the most. Simple si Duterte, di ba? Parang malasakit at tapang at malasakit. Si Miss Lenny, si BBM, parang medyo may konting observations, yung ibang mga nagsuri ng kanilang messaging na masyadong convoluted o masyadong stick to script pero simple at connected. So yun, between the principles and the results, where do you place voters in the messaging of politicians?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, voters, citizens, they can sense when people are authentic, when, when people come to them and see them, as equals, or they're being talked down on. Parang, voters are very keen and will pick up on those things na parang, oh, bakit ngayon lang kayo nandito? Bakit ngayon lang kayo nakikiusap? Conversion therapy ba itong interview na ito? Parang anong gusto niyo mangyari dito? So parang, I think there's elements of that. Obviously, it's not just about the fault of the messaging. It's also the impact of disinformation, di ba? Na parang liberals, media, human rights actors, they have been smeared, they have been tarnished. Kaya, dun sa research ko with human rights workers, pag pumupunta daw sila sa ibang mga barangay, takot makipag-usap sa kanila yung mga tao sa barangay because of, potential threats of red tagging. Ayaw lang nilang madamay sa ganong usapin. So, it's a very complicated issue. I think some of it, as I think you're hinting, getting at a little bit around tone, na parang kailangan dapat, it's very open and inviting and empowering rather than a top-down kind of educating and talking down on somebody. It is also selecting specific issues. I go back to the idea of finding very local issues that are connect very much to yung puso at damdamin ng mga botante.
Okay. Pero ang tansya ko, this could continue further, pero I don't know if your study also looks at why halimbawa, the BDS bloggers or influencers are getting more traction than maybe the pro-Lenny or anti-BDS bloggers. What is happening? Why are they getting more traction?
That's a good question. So, and that's why for us, it's important to also study them, monitor them, watch what they're doing, and also interview them to know about their strategy, how they try to appeal to their audiences, ano yung strategies nila of, seducing their audience, revealing information, insinuating conspiracy. So very practically, what I find, quite interesting about their strategy is palaging sinasama ka nila sa proseso nila.
Mhm.
Parang
Connected.
uso
Oo.
yung YouTuber na parang, o basahin natin itong article, o tingnan nyo to, o misleading itong journalist na ito, o biased agad. Parang they break it down part by part and parang kasama ka dun sa investigation.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
ibang-iba yun sa academic. Ang academic is, ito yung argument ko, ito yung examples ko. 'Di ba parang ganun yung training po namin. So sa journalist then 'di ba parang it's about who, what, where, why. But yung process, sinasama ng blogger yung audience niya dun sa proseso niya. Tapos palaging may feeling ka na you're gonna discover something new. So, parang when I see some of the vloggers and itong mga mega influencers, yung mga gine-guest nila sa mga show nila on YouTube or other broadcast partisan news channels is yung mga tao na hindi gine-guest sa mainstream media. So parang feeling mo, ay, parang bago to parang may bagong mare-reveal na na-suppress dati. Parang may
mhm.
ganun silang palaging messaging na parang we're gonna reveal a truth that has been suppressed by experts and journalists.
Okay. Actually, pagka tiningnan mo rin naman from both sides, ano, yung pro and anti, you see a lot of good, bad, and not so good writing. And good, bad, and not so good messengers, di ba? Kasi yung iba talagang may research. Merong pundasyon yung mga komentaryo. Ang problema lang is parang tipong they're preaching to their choirs. Hindi nagko-crossover, ano? You tried to actually reach out to the other side of the aisle recently. Tell me that story. Bakit kayo nagdesisyon to talk to SAS?
Yes, Sas Sasot, mega influencer, over a million followers on Facebook. Obviously, one of the propagandists aligned with Rodrigo Duterte, one of the alleged fake news peddlers, reported on by mainstream media. We guested her on the show Catch Me If You Can. It's a podcast available on Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we drew a lot of flack from people on Twitter na parang, how dare you platform sa Sasot? She is a fake news peddler. I just want to say na I understand that people have, very raw emotions and reactions when it comes to somebody like Sas, given what we have gone through over the past 7 years. Yeah, some of my journalist colleagues tried to listen daw pero hindi nila natapos dahil nakaka-trigger ang pakikinig
It
kay
hurts,
Sas.
sabi nila.
Opo, yeah. So, and nauunawaan ko yun. I really sympathize as someone who has also been working with human rights workers, helping them on their communication campaigns. Pero let me just say na yung Catch Me If You Can, it's a whole show and we've been going on for more than 1 year now. We're on our second year, our third season. It's a show all about trolls and we interview trolls every episode. May interview kami with a troll, with a fake account operator, parody account operator, influencer, strategist. And sa season 3, that's the time that we thought na it's time to guest Sasa. So I think it's quite strategic to guest her now. Ngayon na galit sa kanya, obviously ang mga kakamping, galit din sa kanya ang Marcos camp. 'Di ba dahil nag-split sila around Marcos and his pivot back to the United States, and for SAS that is a deal breaker for her. So for us, we wanted to know, is there something more there? I think it's also interesting to understand from her, parang someone from her background and her sexual, her sexual identity as a transgender woman. Why would you vote for someone like Duterte? I think that reveals a lot about her moral psychology, and for us, it provides us a data point to understand and to create messaging for people like her, counter messaging.
Nagkaroon ng panawagan, ano, yung ilang netizens na i-deplatform. What is deplatforming?
Yeah, usap-usapin po ang deplatforming. So, deplatforming is yung idea na wag na natin silang bigyan ng espasyo, wag na natin sila bigyan ng airtime kung hindi naman sila sumusubaybay sa mga democratic principles. If you have always failed at adhering to democratic principles, if you are a disinformer, dapat ma-deplatform ka na. Huwag ka nang bigyan ng espasyo pa.
Mhm.
So, some people were upset na parang dapat wag na natin siyang imbitahin sa media platforms. For us, ang masasabi ko lang po is yung konteksto naman ng podcast namin is we're a micro platform. We're an educational show. It's a show that is very unique. It's about the psychology and the business of trolling. And we have a track record of doing research about trolls and we contextualize their responses. We see trolls, and our guests really as unreliable narrators.
Okay.
And I think that's
Yeah, you talked about depolarization, ano? Parang whole of society approach. But
mhm.
deplatforming seems to be an antithesis, ano? A countercurrent. Paano yun ma-handle? Kasi parang, of course, you can talk about not giving them space because that's by editorial policies and standards, ayaw mo. Pero you talk about reaching out to the other side or depolarization. How can the conversations be bridged kung parallel public spheres pa rin ang mode? We would not talk to one another.
Totoo po yan. So, yun po yung center of the controversy, right? What is the right way to open up a conversation across political camps? So, you're right that our objective here is to learn from her, to get information, to get new data, na parang okay, magagamit natin itong data na to for us to strategize moving forward. But as you say, there's a secondary objective na to perform a ritual of a conversation across political sides.
Mhm.
Na very clear dun sa setup namin na kami ni Kat Ventura, who is a journalist and my co-host of Catch Me If You Can, we are of one political camp, Sas is of another political camp, and let's try to have a conversation. We will disagree, but we're not going to, embarrass each other. Hindi ito shaming, hindi ito gotcha kind of show. And for some, meron kaming nakuhang mga tweets from some netizens na parang yun yung remark nila na it's not so much about what they learned but it was quite new for us to listen in on a conversation like this.
Okay.
So I think it's a start, it's an experiment, and we're not saying na this is the right way to do it or it's the only solution, right? And honest naman kami doon na this is just one experiment.
All right. But how much listening should you do and how much calling out? Halimbawa, magkaiba talagang
Mm.
panig. Di ba? Parang may mga ginawa at sinabi at sinulat na parang hindi talaga maayos. Pero for someone coming from the other side, how much listening and how much calling out should you do?
My answer there is it really depends on the person. So, when I talk to students who ask me that question is, it's also, protect your own mental health.
Mhm.
Kung hindi mo kaya, that's your own choice to withdraw. You don't need to put yourself in that situation if you're not there yet. Some people want to test the waters and maybe might want to listen in, see whether it might reveal something about them, whether they might see something, oh, I identify with that. For some, they will see it as purely for research na parang, okay, ganito sila mag-isip, therefore, ganito dapat yung atake natin next time. So, and that's okay too. So for me, it is really depending on the individual and their context, anong kaya nila, ano yung objective din nila when it comes to having that conversation. So for some people, yeah, they're not there yet. And we are really, yeah, honest about that na for some people, it's a real process talaga. So yeah, matagal po tong proseso, itong depolarization.
Okay. Now, when we talk about disinformation, the menu of actors and platforms and methods, ano-ano yun? You talk about this in your book, ano, yung parallel public spheres. So from the PRs to what they do on Facebook pages o yung mga parody pages and then all the other things. Give us a complete menu. How does it happen? The persons, the platforms, the methods.
Wow, ang dami. Yeah, ang dami-dami na nila. So obviously, so I'll just give a few examples. No? So one of the new trends ngayon, itong tinatawag naming knowledge influencers.
Okay.
Knowledge influencers. Ito yung mga pa-expert.
Mhm.
Kanya-kanyang eksperto, whether sa health and wellness, whether sa politics, whether uh, for some foreign policy, yun yung eksperto nila. Yung iba naman, polling, di ba? Parang kanya-kanyang eksperto. And we also admit na ngayon yung disinformers, hindi na lang sila itong mga parody accounts or itong mga fake accounts on Twitter, but some of them may mga PhD na din sila. They are in positions of authority. It's also quite similar to what we see in other countries na in hyperpolarized societies, may kanya-kanya ng, academic experts ang bawat political party, kumbaga. So I think that's quite a worrying trend, actually, na kung may kanya-kanya ng pseudo-experts ang bawat kampo. So that's one example. Yeah, we have other examples of obviously TikTok is super popular now everywhere. Although dito sa US, 'di ba, gusto siyang i-ban dahil sa kanyang data failure sa data privacy. So obviously TikTok is one platform we should be monitoring.
Mhm. Pero ang sabi nila, ang problema natin para moving forward, ano, 2025, magkakaroon ng midterm elections, 2028, magkakaroon ng national synchronized elections. Ano yung outlook sa tingin niyo? Will this fester even more? Could people actually do more focused interventions para mabawasan yung epekto sa the choice that voters make?
I think it depends on the choices that we make now. When it comes to civil society coming together, the kinds of educational outreach that we do to voters, I think the future is not written in stone. I think it's very fluid, it's very changeable. We saw just, a couple days ago, a huge shift when it comes to political alliances and allegiances. So, yun naman yung sabi-sabi natin sa politika sa Pilipinas, 'di ba? It's very fluid. And so I think that there's a lot of potential here for change, for interventions. I really think that we should be thinking more about the grassroots and connecting with communities.
Okay. Sa Harvard noong 1992 pa yata, si Gerald Ford, dating presidente, ang sabi niya, ang problema sa eleksyon, meron kang candidates without platforms, political parties without principles, consultants without convictions, and elections without voters. How does information make it worse or better? Or
Wow.
technology for that matter, how could
Mm-mm.
technology improve on it? Parang ganun
Yeah,
yata yung eleksyon, ano, yung kwento everywhere. At
for
core
sure.
is about guns, goons, gold, glitter, and gigabytes.
Yes. And social media, it's all about the most intense and extreme perspective that wins,
Mhm,
unfortunately.
mhm,
It's always the most extreme perspective of either side that
mhm,
gets the most attention. Dahil ito yung pinaka-emotional, ito yung pinaka-outrageous, and ito yung pinaka-nagtitrend and nagva-viral. And therefore, the kind of, yung metrics natin on what is popular on social media, I think we should wean ourselves away from that because isipin natin na on social media, itong loudest voices, angriest voices will prevail. I don't think that's a good way of democratic exchange. That's not a good practice of democratic exchange.
mhm,
I still think, that there's a real value in human conversation, in face-to-face conversation, in the conversation we're having here in your show, as opposed to on Twitter na, di ba, 140 characters, pasikatan, paingayan ang laban sa social media.
okay. Pero sabi nga nila, kahit tayo yung parang Twitter at Facebook center, ano, parang ground zero ng mundo. Dahil sa dami ng mga engaged. And we have more cell phones than people in the Philippines. Ang problema, yung access sa internet is still inhibited by prices and access to services, no? Parang tipong, so it's about 60 million Filipinos ba? 70 maybe now ang merong social media accounts at saka engage, sa mga social media platforms. But that means again that, if we're 120 million people in all, for every Filipino online, another is offline or has no smartphone or has no access. How do you bridge the gap between those connected and those not connected?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that connects with yung idea of going back to the grassroots and trying to empower local communities, identify very local problems that local communities can address across political lines. Pero the idea na walang epekto ang social media sa mga tao na hindi nasa social media, I think I disagree with that because yung mga narratives and awayan on social media, it has real consequences in our politics, in the kinds of political exchanges and debates and discussions that people have offline as well. So, yung kwento-kwento sa social media, magta-travel din yan down to the community. So, itong conflict sa social media, may epekto din ito sa local communities. And that's why again, yung way of engaging with each other on social media, to find a way to tone it down, to dial down the anger, and to check ourselves, I think is so important. And yeah, to empower citizens. Parang I don't see citizens na, bobotante. 'Di ba? Dahil wala sila sa social media. I think we have a lot to learn from them. And we need to engage them and meet them where they are.
Okay. But you just said that the angriest, the most acute, the loudest voices actually get greatest traction,
Mm-mm.
Could you back the tide? And you're saying na parang we should have more meaningful, more open, more gentle, more polite conversations. Are you hopeful or not so hopeful that we could back the tide?
Yeah, as a sociologist, as an academic, I choose to be hopeful. I choose to believe in my students that they might have the answers, better answers than the ones that I put forward. I can only present the invitation for them to, engage with these ideas. So I think parang I'm not sure whether you've seen that my colleagues and myself, Nicole Corato, we are making available this community engagement plan na meron siyang community engagement fund that, young people, volunteers, private individuals, creative workers, graphic designers, they can apply for funding na base sa pag-aaral namin. Kung meron kayong, if you're inspired to implement your own experiment when it comes to democratic innovations, counter disinformation experiments, we can give you that mentoring, we can give you a seed fund to start your own project. So, we're putting our money where our mouth is. Kumbaga na meron kaming study, meron kaming ideas, meron kaming principles, pero maybe the best execution some other person can do. Maybe the younger generation might have ideas.
Okay. Mga ilan na yung nag-apply ng grants and mentorship
Eight-
support?
18 na po yung nag-apply since February, since na-publish namin itong call for applications in GMA Network, Community Engagement Fund. I hope that it's flashed on screen here. And then 4 na yung nanalo ng grants.
Okay.
And hopefully there's a couple more coming soon. Some of them are digital literacy focused, some at college students, some at elementary school students. So parang very targeted kinds of digital literacy efforts. And then there's a couple more na conversation conversation guides naman yung gusto nilang gawin.
Okay. So pagka ganyan, you talked about mga elementary or high school students, that should be very inspiring. Sino yung dapat priority targets if you could have limited resources but really parang limitless clients to serve? Ano yung iyong pa-priority dapat bilang
Hmm, good question. So, feeling ko medyo kulang tayo ng mga digital literacy na talking to our elders.
Mhm.
Na parang I think no offense to the elderly and to to my mom's generation, pero maraming misinformation sa Viber, sa mga messaging groups. I think kailangan din natin silang gawan ng targeted and unique forms of digital literacy. Baka hindi on web, but baka more conversation kind of discussion guides, just an idea. So I think kailangan nila. And then what else do we need? I think, in the context of creative workers, kailangan din natin to normalize discussions of ethics within industries of advertising, of PR, of political campaigns.
Journalism.
Parang paano natin sila ma-empower na para mamulat sila na parang marami sa kanila alam ko are disgruntled pero natatakot.
Mhm.
Natatakot to come out, to call out their boss, to reveal information about the last election. So I think could maybe like a legal protection mechanism for potential whistleblowers, or baka just a community na parang mag-inuman itong mga creative workers to talk about and compare their problems and issues.
Mhm. Is there a facility parang tipong dial a friend? Halimbawa, meron kang na-spot na parang disinformation or misinformation ito, or how do I validate? How do I verify this?
Hmm.
May ganun ba na parang tipong they could log on to an email account or a
Hmm.
self-help account or an app that could help them verify? Kasi some of the things you suggest are really parang tipong protocols, di ba?
Yes.
Parang internet or parang website na merong about us, may contacts, may addresses, yan ba merong parang konting history na nandiyan sila for some time already, parang gano'n. So, meron bang gano'n na parang dial a friend if you want to check out this information piece?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Baka dapat kayo Mamalu ang mag-apply at kayong team. Yeah, so I think that's a really good idea. I mean, a lot of fact checker communities have their own tip lines. I know Internews has their own database na parang you can be trained as a volunteer. There's out of the box media literacy, break the fake movement, who are empowering young people to participate in fact checking, in debunking. I know GMA and GMA News Online has an exciting partnership with Google News, which is also about pre-bunking and using artificial intelligence. So marami namang bagong innovative approaches, pero yung phone a friend sounds new to me.
Para kasi lahat ng nag-uusap medyo converted, more or less aware,
Totoo.
experts. Pero parang kung ikaw mamamaya na gusto lang magtanong, paano ho ba i-verify? I think yung ganong facility might help para at least medyo you talk to people. Hindi siya equivalent ng face-to-face, but person.
Totoo. Yeah. So parang may human element na may kausap ka talaga na live. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay, so moving forward, ano pa yung iyong inaasahan if you are to list top 3 priorities ng mga advocates against disinformation? Ano dapat ang
Yeah.
gawin natin together?
That's a good question. So I think we need to be more inclusive and to blast open the counter disinformation space na as you say na it doesn't seem to be working na tayo-tayo lang palagi nag-uusap at nagle-lecture sa kanya-kanya, but we need to have more people join the party, kumbaga. I think, storytellers, I think, lifestyle columnists, entertainment, filmmakers are important resources to invite in this movement. So I think we need to think of the diversity and trying to empower more people, invite them to join us in the fight against disinfo. Number two, I think we need to again catch ourselves when we tend to be blaming the massa na parang For me, it's not only inaccurate, but it is also contrary to trying to win them over to our side, 'di ba? Na parang it plays into yung assumption nila na elitista tayo. Kung, 'di ba, kung palaging ganun yung tono natin pag tinuturuan sila sa mga voter literacy or media literacy programs. And then what's the last thing? Maybe it's again about the value of conversation. So I think it's important to try to put ourselves in, you know, having in uncomfortable conversations, to take the risk, to have a conversation with somebody you might have disagreements with. Not everyone is there yet. I think there's still very fresh, raw wounds that need to be healed, and that takes a lot of time, and not everyone is there yet. And I totally acknowledge that. But for those of us who, are trying to find ways to repair some relationships, some friendships, or even family relationships that were broken apart in the last election cycle, to take those steps towards healing.
Okay, that's very good. So parang I think evergreen naman yung hopefulness ng mga advocates. Pero last question, sa CSO community, and there are a lot of them, ano sa tingin mo ang parang next steps for them? Do they have to reboot? Do they have to retool? Do they have to reflect on possibly the errors or the failings of how they communicate?
Yes, the CSO community and obviously academics are part of, this coalition. We need to see each other as allies. We're here to work with each other. I think we're here to, learn from each other. I think obviously there's a time for reflection. Marami sa atin na disillusion last year, and we're really in this point of reflection. It also doesn't help that the jobs in media are becoming more vulnerable and scarce. I think it's so common nowadays, itong mga big layoffs in news organizations specifically. So people are in very vulnerable positions. So all the more that we need to lean on each other and support one another. I think, yeah, we're here as allies. We're here, to nudge each other to do better. Pero hindi naman, yeah, we're here for each other.
All right. On that note, magandang panawagan yun, dapat all hands on deck, all voices in the conversation. Maraming salamat, Professor Jonathan Corpus-Ong, Associate Professor ng Global Digital Media ng University of Massachusetts at author at co-author ng dalawang seminal, pivotal books on troll farms and influence operations. Magandang araw, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Malu. What a real pleasure to be here.